My name is Matt, I co-run Zelig, I'm a composer and I oversee all the sound design here. The whole idea of the project was to make it out of sounds that people hear while jogging on the street or running on the street, like urban running, and that was kind of it. So it's how to make a piece of music out of those sounds. So obviously the first thing that kind of comes to mind is the footsteps, footstep rhythm, and how to make a rhythm out of that kind of thing, and make it kind of engaging. But they didn't have an edit, which is kind of mostly how we start with Man V. I think that they like to start that way, which is fun for us because it means we get to make lots of wacky, well, hopefully wacky stuff and try different routes that are not restricted by an edit. Sometimes it's intimidating, but once you relax into it, you can end up doing way more interesting stuff. This was the first work in progress, which sounds like a work in progress to me. Yeah. I guess it's also trying to convey the lightness of everything being made out of air, obviously. But it's way slower than where we ended up. We use SoundMiner, which is it's a database sound library management program. So we literally everything in there. So all it's from small boutique libraries to huge libraries everyone has, to also, but everything we record for any other different project is just all in here. For this project is a mix of footsteps we've recorded for different projects and some library stuff. Everything's always just a mash and a collage of everything, unless we need a really specific sound. But also something for this is that because it was I wanted to get a vibe really quick, I kind of wasn't bothered about recording stuff. I just wanted to get something down as quickly as possible and to get the feel right, because it had to work as a piece of music more than a sound design or sound design recording kind of exercise. This was the second one. Sounds quite similar. Has some balloon sounds in it too. But again, it's still not, I mean, it has more variety and more contrast than sounds, but it's still not very fast and it's not very engaging, I guess. Something like that would have to be carried by the images as opposed to pushing them. This is the third one. This might actually be the same tempo, but half time. And you can hear some sounds that make it into the final one. Yeah. So you can kind of see that idea, I guess, building a little bit. We liked the basketball, the sneaker sound, and it was a cool function, and it was really easy to turn that into a melody, but we had to drop it because it was indoor. It's not outdoor. So this is finally when it's now the tempo that it ends up being. Again, there's still something slightly, the rhythm's not pushing forward. It's a bit passive, I guess, but to my ears. But there's still some sounds in there. Whoa. I don't remember that bit. I was making a melody out of someone stamping on a grate. Yeah, and that's the start of a build-up, I guess. And I do remember actually having listened to that last whip and this one, the next one, which was a week later. I do remember having the moment oh, actually this needs to just work as a rhythmic musical piece. And once I just get that right, then everything else will fit in. I think after that whip is when I did this bit. Which just feels like a catchy rhythmic kind of melody, and you kind of want to push, it pushes you forward, I guess. And then I think this is when they started to edit to it, this version, I think. Once we had all this edit in place and they started to send over pictures, then in between the rhythm, we fill in everything else with like the really specific sound design stuff when they started to send over bits, like all the particle stuff and obviously the stuff that we're going to sync to and use, which was in Beat because they edited to it. Like the stuff that started without the picture was the footstep sounds. So it was basically finding some footsteps that I thought could be used as percussion and then just creating different drum layers. Basically just building a kit almost, but on different layers. I think that's just 3 footsteps, like 3 gritty, grassy footsteps, but played pitched on the SX. I probably just would have top and tailed the EQ just so you don't have like loads of machine gun like bass kind of thing going on. I listened back to these ones and in isolation, they sound a bit strange. It's kind of like that hi-hat-y, like high percussion thing. There's like a click on it, but you don't notice in the mix, which is... yeah, and there's these wooden footsteps. They're quite a nice bass drum sound, actually. And it doesn't really matter that they don't have any variation for some reason. It just works in the... Because I guess because low frequency, you don't really notice. Like I find all the stuff ends up being relatively simple. It's just getting to that point of realising the idea and of like... So there's a bit of a progression, obviously, and some nice rhythms, but it's relatively simple. But it's just kind of catchy, and that's kind of what makes it work. There's like some sub-effects which always add massive weight and things to things. That's an like a tune sub. This is just a sub-effect kind of thing. This accent, it makes more sense with those in, actually. It's weird because listening back now it's quite infuriating because I would have definitely done something, had a progression in this last 3 bars up to the break. Well, it just repeats at the moment. But the reason why I get away with it, I think, musically is because the sound design is in there and does something, like carries it over. But it slightly repeats slightly too much for what I would do now. This is the stuff that's on the output. So you see it's super compressed. Super limited, but I never usually ever use any UAD stuff anymore. I usually just have this L2, I have the Fab Filter multiband and a Fab Filter EQ, and that's it usually. But it does kind of glue stuff together. This Pultec glues it all together on the SSL2 thing. But yeah, it's strange. It's funny when I opened it and saw all that stuff on there. But yeah, I use the Fab Filter stuff. Nowadays I use it on every single channel strip, where on this one for some reason I was using the Logic EQ. So this is the sound design soloed basically. The city stuff's kind of obvious because it needs to sound like you're outside. And especially if it's light, although I'm just about to contradict that because the weight of the Atmos is always so useful because it fills out the mix and feels nice, just like sonically. So there's these like just key moments. Well, I guess those Atmos things are actually adding to the rhythm, which I didn't realise. Yeah, like those ones are like creating not like you would do like a percussive roll into the next phrase. And then in the end section, when it's the big build, there is more lighter city sounds. It's when all the birds come in. For some reason. Like the lighter, suburby lighter sounds might have been from my mum's house in Manchester. But the city ones are probably a mix from like New York, Paris, and different library stuff. Like I said, it's always a mashup of things. Like the most satisfying stuff that adds like, it just like feels like it ups the quality of things loads, is all the like particle, like high, it's like high fidelity, high detail recordings of like this kind of debris and air stuff. Because also this kind of stuff is, because it's recorded so well, like if you use the, what they're called, like the Sennheiser 6020s or whatever they're called, the 6000 series ones, they record up to like 30,000 hertz. So they've got this like weird airiness to them, but because they're so like nice quality mics, they react super well to any kind of EQ or processing you do. So if you, a lot of the times with like wind sounds or debris sounds, I'll just cut everything up to like 10,000K or to 10K or whatever. And it'll still sound super nice and super airy and crisp, but just because the recording's so good, you can do that. And you'll still have the fidelity, but not all like the bottom-endiness, muddiness of the mix. And that's usually the same with the cloth. Like the cloth stuff, you can just dial in what kind of cloth you want it to feel like just by EQing it extremely. Also here, the sound design is just adding, is just building tension and then dissipating tension, just like in any rhythmic kind of way. We've got like our own library of loads of balloon sounds because they're so, they're so useful in the fact that you can create loads of different weird percussion sounds out of them. They're not in this piece, just like the kind of simple, what you would expect in this piece, but also because they're rubber, like the way you stretch it, it was like way too long stretching rubber sound, like stretching balloons out in different ways. And they just come in useful for everything, like loads of different kinds of sounds that you wouldn't expect, I guess, can be made out of balloons. Like a pressure air release kind of sound. Yeah, it pans quickly left. But again, it's kind of quite extremely EQ'd. And then there's some, that's kind of a reverb kind of acting a bit like a chorus, which it's really nice to do it with the Valhalla Room stuff. Just kind of dial it in until it just kind of tickles the edge of your like periphery and then just leave it. It's good to do that with mono sounds as well every now and again. Or just Foley stuff, like adding chorus to it, fills it out a bit more. But these are all like things that you do musically. I would have done that. I would have, like now I would have stressed this perspective change loads more. Just it doesn't feel as like I'm in the face of the balloon as much, or even the rubber or the texture. It feels like it should be more weighty, whereas in this version it's this slightly more high frequency detail. And I probably would have stressed it in the music. The fact that we're building up to a pause, or like a chorus. I think it was always a case of trying to keep the interest. So there is places that it does pause, like the stuff like that, like the rhythmic detail. You're just playing with people's expectations of trying to keep them interested. Yeah, it's funny, like when I say keeping people interested, like they're going to be interested because the visuals are amazing, but it's hard to make sure you don't fall behind that, accept that it's going to be, or make sure that what you're doing is interested enough to keep up with the visuals and not just be supported by it, I guess. Because you could almost, I think you could kind of almost do anything to this with this piece and it would be cool because it looks so nice. The more I've listened to it again from the millionth time, the sound design is actually pushing and pulling the rhythm, which is kind of cool. from like a sound design point of view, the project's relatively simple. Like there's nothing that's like mind-blowingly innovative. Whichever whip that was, like the fourth or fifth one, I realised that it had to be a bit faster to maintain that kind of engagement, and it kind of gives you a bit more freedom to do those kind of interesting pauses where you like play with the rhythm or play with the accents a bit more. Yeah. My favourite kind of sounds are usually always the cloth and the kind of debris, what would you call it? Like debris, but it's like miscellaneous debris, so anything that kind of like this stuff. And we probably use it in every single project in different ways because it's so versatile and it's so satisfying to listen to. Yeah, it's weird. It's like if you hear like a really satisfying like tremolo like high string section, it just feels something really nice about it in your ears somehow. And there's the cloth and the dirt kind of has that same kind of weird effect on you when you listen to it. It adds like a different kind of presence and air to stuff in the mix, which gives, I guess it gives you, in hindsight, it lets you push and pull the mix in different places, because when you use those sounds, the mix opens up, and when you don't use them, it kind of shuts a bit back down. Like that one opens it up a little bit. It still has a rhythm in places. My mix bus is quite simple nowadays. It's just it's a multi-band fab filter, an EQ just in case I need to take some low off, and an like the Waves L2. But I did listen to this before. This is without these three. It does sound a bit cleaner actually. I put the Pultec on. Yeah. Kind of gels it a bit more together. I mean, that's hardly doing anything. I mean, it's just boosting some really airy stuff at 20k and compressing a tiny bit. And then the SSL's compressing a tiny bit as well. I mean, it is gelling them together in that kind of really subtle, almost pointless analogy kind of way. But this is like completely different. I mean, there's not that many sound effects in this one. It's pretty much just I mean, it's just kind of syncing with the letters a bit, isn't it? But in the mix. Just the musical elements going to this bus. I'm just automating on one shot. Yeah, it's just for that kind of vintagey vibe, wherever that is. On that black and white shot. Oh yeah, I'm doing that trick as well with Echo Boy. I don't know if you know, where you set the wet all the way to 100% and set the time to 0, and then if you choose a different style, it's actually like it's a speaker emulation as opposed to just a delay, which is kind of cool. I mean, you could do it a million other ways, but again, it looks kind of simple. I wish everything was way more complicated and difficult, but it's just creating the vibe, and once that's right, yeah, once the music sounds right, everything else just is answered to that question of does it work and does it feel cool, and then yeah, everything fits in that kind of world, I guess. I did start making, how I got into music was making hip hop. So every time we get a project like this, I find it relatively easy to do this bit. but it started by just creating like quite a normal kind of hip hop vibe loop, like a sequence of 8 bars or whatever, and then taking it and then splitting it all into different instruments and then playing with like the rhythmic tension or whatever. I probably would have just started off with that chord sequence because I've just literally pasted it into a different instrument. There's a keyscape Wurlitzer, but then being driven quite a bit by the decapitator. That's Omnisphere mono synth thing. Don't even know what drums these are. Some random sample library drums. I don't even know where they came from. I think from memory what I did, I probably played them and quantized them, but then in a bizarre thing, I went and just and then I nudged them to the cuts, so it just perfectly locks with the, like those. Yeah, because they'd done it to a tempo, I had to just nudge things around. And luckily it created this weird swing. There is actually a balloon sound there, look. The sound design is really subtle in this one. But again, it's, when you say sound design, there is some sound effects, but really the music, like it's definitely a piece of music, but it's functioning as sound design as well. This Velcro one is a weird one that we did. I say weird in a good way. It's music functioning as sound design, or vice versa. I don't know, you figure that bit out, I guess. That's the cloth stuff. What made this interesting for me is that these kind of musical phrases, I didn't, like usually you figure out a tempo when you get the image, but on these ones I didn't. I would change the tempo at every cut, so it's a certain tempo now, and then the tempo changes here in the whole track, so it gives that weird like stopping and starting, pushing and pulling rhythm, which is kind of cool. Which is the effect we're trying to go for.